give me the microphone.
श्रीभगवानुवाच अशोच्यानन्वशोचस्त्वं प्रज्ञावादांश्च भाषसे गतासु न गतासूंश्च नानुशोचन्ति पण्डिताः न त्वेवाहं जातु नासं न त्वं नेमे जनाधिपाः न चैव न भविष्यामः सर्वे वयमतः परम् देहिनोऽस्मिन् यथा देहे कौमारं यौवनं जरा तथा देहान्तरप्राप्तिर्धीरस्तत्र न मुह्यति मात्रा स्पर्शास्तु कौन्तेय शीतोष्णसुखदुःखदाः आगमापायिनो नित्यास्तां तितिक्षस्व भारत यं हि न व्यथयन्त्येते पुरुषं पुरुषर्षभ समदुःखसुखं धीरं सोऽमृतत्वाय कल्पते नासतो विद्यते भावो नाभावो विद्यते सतः उभयोरपि दृष्टोऽन्तस्त्वनयोस्तत्त्वदर्शिभिः अविनाशि तु तद्विद्धि येन सर्वमिदं ततम् विनाशमव्ययस्यास्य न कश्चित् कर्तुमर्हति अन्तवन्त इमे देहा नित्यस्योक्ताः शरीरिणः अनाशिनो प्रमेयस्य तस्माद्युध्यस्व भारत य एनं वेत्ति हन्तारं यश्चैनं मन्यते हतम् उभौ तौ न विजानीतो नायं हन्ति न हन्यते न जायते म्रियते वा कदाचिन् नायं भूत्वा भविता वा न भूयः अजो नित्यः शाश्वतोऽयं पुराणो न हन्यते हन्यमाने शरीरे वेदाविनाशिनं नित्यं य एनमजमव्ययम् कथं स पुरुषः पार्थ कं घातयति हन्तिकम् वासांसि जीर्णानि यथा विहाय नवानि गृह्णाति नरोपराणि तथा शरीराणि विहाय जीर्णान्यन्यानि संयाति नवानि देहि नैनं छिन्दन्ति शस्त्राणि नैनं दहति पावकः न चैनं क्लेदयन्त्यापो न शोषयति मारुतः अच्छेद्योऽयमदाह्योऽयम् अक्लेद्यो शोष्य एव च नित्यः सर्वगतस्थाणुरचलोऽयं सनातनः अव्यक्तोऽयमचिन्त्योऽयम् अविकार्योऽयमुच्यते तस्मादेवं विदित्वैनं नानुशोचितुमर्हसि.
So we read in the 16th verse, very important verse. As I said, a monk once said, it is the philosophical heart of the Bhagavad Gita. Existence, absolute existence, which is called Sat, pure being. That is the only reality, that is the absolute reality. And borrowing reality from it, all these appear with names and forms and transactions, uses. Nama, Rupa, Vyavahara. This is the meaning. Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya. Pure being alone, which is identical with pure consciousness, is the only reality which we experience, transact with through many names and forms. So this is the central teaching. Advaita Vedanta is based on this. So if you have any comments to make, yes. Yes.
Swamiji, can you explain Shankara's Brahman, Jagat, Satya, Mithya and Thakur's Brahman or Ishwar, Shakti and Nitya, Nitya? Why Thakur's appears intellectually to our limited understanding more understandable?
I will not. The reason is I am approaching it through an Advaitic angle here. Sri Ramakrishna's is a much wider canvas. Because what he says is equally acceptable to the non-dualists, to the dualists and other schools. But I just point you in the right direction. A brilliant young monk of our order, Ayan Maharaj, he has just written a wonderful book, Infinite Paths to Infinite Reality. Infinite Paths to Infinite Reality. It has just been published by Oxford University Press, where he talks about this. And he gives it the name Vijnana Vedanta. So Sri Ramakrishna does not dismiss the world as unreal, like Shankara does. But what he does is an extension. Does he say the world is real as we see it? No. What he says is an extension of what Shankara has said. The example he gives is this. When you go into a house, you go through the ground floor and the first floor and the second floor, you climb through the stairs up to the roof. And when you reach the roof of the house, leaving all of this behind, and in the roof of the house you say the same thing that the roof is made of, the same concrete and the bricks and all of that. When you look back and see what you left behind is also made of the same thing. Now he says, in the path of jnana, one goes to the absolute by saying not this, this is false, that is false. We did that today. Borrowed existence, borrowed existence, borrowed existence. Then intrinsic existence, existence itself. So that is the roof. But then Sri Ramakrishna says, when you look back upon what you had dismissed, all borrowed existence, you realize that all of those things are nothing other than Brahman itself, which we dismissed as false in our first climb, neti, not this, not this. Now when you look back upon it, you realize Brahman itself, God itself is appearing in all these forms. Now this is not against Advaita. You can take it as an extension of Advaita. In fact, I have seen Advaitic teachers saying exactly the same thing. Once you see Brahman, and you see, then look back upon the world, you see it's Brahman alone appearing as this world. Once you understand what is wood, now you can easily say, this is a table. No, it's wood appearing as a table. Its a name is table, the form is a table, and you can use it as a table. But it's not a table, it's wood through and through. Can't you say, if somebody says, can't you say both the wood is true and the table is true? No, you cannot. Because without the wood, the table cannot exist. Without the wood, if I take the wood away, you keep the table. No, it won't exist. So the table has a dependent existence. In what sense dependent? It borrows its existence from the wood. Just like the potato borrowing heat. Similarly, this table borrows its existence from the wood. But anyway, when we are dealing with the table, we are dealing with nothing other than wood itself. When you touch it, it's touch wood. Similarly, Sri Ramakrishna says, when you are dealing with the so-called world, you are dealing with nothing other than God. Swami Vivekananda said it once. He said, never approach anything except as God. The people in your life, the situations in your life. It is the same divinity in appearing good and bad, scary and friendly forms. So that is the Vijnana Vedanta Sri Ramakrishna. It's an extension. Remember, he is not saying the world is real as it is, like the materialist says. No, in that case, Ramana Maharshi made a very interesting, he's a strict non-dualist, he made a very interesting comment. He said, who can say that the world is real? Who can say that the world is real? We say, we are saying it. But no. Those who are in ignorance, they have no right to say the world is real. They have no idea about what reality is. It is only the enlightened person who can say the world is real. What an interesting thing. then who says that the world is false? The ignorant person says world is real, and if the enlightened person also says world is real, then who is saying that the world is false? It's all the in-between people like us. True. Those who are on the path of Vedanta, on the path of sadhana, those who are climbing neti, they say that the world is false. World is false, Brahman is real. But once you realize Brahman, you say that Brahman is real and the world is nothing but Brahman. Look at the formulation. Brahman is real, the world is false, and you are nothing but Brahman. But it's also equally correct to say the world is nothing but Brahman. But on the path of sadhana, on the path of spiritual practice, on the path towards enlightenment, it's not helpful to say that the world is real. It will pull you, suck you back in the game. What the Advaitin denies is that the way that we see it, that this seems real in itself. We are not aware of Brahman. Brahman is right here. The ultimate reality is right here. When you look at the table, isn't the wood right here? When you look at the pot, isn't the clay right there? When you look at the wave, isn't the water right there? When you look at the snake, isn't the rope right there? If it's a rope appearing as a snake. Similarly, Brahman is right here, but we don't see it. And when we say the world is real, we mean that this world has cars and roads and grass and sky, this is real. This is what Advaita denies. No, this is not real. You are making a mistake. The reality and the appearance are both present here. Just as a person who does not understand what wood is and says, no, there is no wood, this is just a table. Is that person seeing the wood? Yes, of course. Just doesn't recognize it. Are we seeing God? Yes, of course. You don't recognize it. That's what is behind the story of the devotees. In every religion you will find God comes to you in many forms. It seems like a story, like a poetic way of expression. Advaita says it's literally true. So that is Vijnana Vedanta. We who are in between, we say Brahman is real and world is false. Why do we say that? Because for us we have to recognize and realize that we are Brahman. That is our problem. We have not yet reached that there. If we don't do that, we will remain, we start off as materialists, we remain as materialists. If someone comes to and says, no, the enlightened person says world is real. Oh, that's what I thought and I'm enlightened. No, you are not. Somebody in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna asks Sri Ramakrishna, is the world false? His answer is very interesting. Why should it be false? That's just a step in Vedanta Vichara. Why should it be? Mithya kehna hota hai vichare katha. In Bengali he says. That's a process, a part of the process in the way of Vedantic analysis. Now is the table false or not? Table in itself, the name table, the form of the table and the function of the table is entirely dependent on the underlying wood. That's what I mean by saying the table is false. Along with the wood, of course it's real. As an example. Who wanted to ask? Somebody wanted to ask? Yeah, there's a gentleman here. Can you tell us your name? It would be good to know everybody's name. What's your name?
Sushil.
Sushil, yes.
Hello, Maharaj. My name is Salil. My question is for enlightened persons, do they experience the dream states and deep sleep states any differently from those who are not enlightened?
Well, yes and no. Yes and no. There's an old Tamil example of a father who takes the son to see a museum. There's an elephant and the son gets scared. It's a proverb. The son gets scared of the elephant and hides behind the father. The father knows it's made of wood. Father knows it's made of wood. Now, would you say that the father is having the same experience as the son?
No.
Yes and no. They are seeing the same thing. But the son is absolutely terrified. He thinks it's a real elephant. But the father is not terrified by the same experience. Why? Experience, they're seeing the same thing, same object. But he knows the underlying reality is wood. It's not a real elephant. The knowledge is different in both cases. There is a recognition in the father's case which is not there in the son's case. That makes all the difference. Now if you say technically it's the same experience, the difference is knowledge and ignorance. But the difference is so much that it could, just as well you can call it a new experience altogether. So for a person who sees God right here, whereas we don't recognize it, would you call it a new experience or the same experience? Both ways you can say. Now, to answer your question, does the enlightened person have dreams and deep sleep and waking? Yes and no. For the enlightened person, this waking world is Turiya, the fourth. The dream is Turiya, the fourth. And deep sleep is also Turiya, the fourth. And yet the actual experience will be the same, like us. They are awake and seeing everything. Obviously they are awake and seeing everything because we can, by behavior we can see. Sri Ramakrishna recognizes Narayan as Narayan, recognizes Latu as Latu, recognizes the Kali temple as Kali temple, recognizes the Vishnu temple as Vishnu temple and Shiva temple as Shiva. So exactly as we are recognizing, Sri Ramakrishna does all of that, plus something more which we don't see. We don't recognize. So is it a new experience? Your question was, is it a new experience or not? Are they experiencing the same thing or not? And it depends. Technically, philosophically, same thing. But phenomenologically, how does it feel like? It feels very different for them. How would you feel like to be always in the presence of God? Yes. Tell us your name. You want to ask a question? You next.
Arundhati Maharaj. What are the strategies for strength, sense and mind control?
Strategies for sense and mind control. When you'll have to come for other seminars, this is a whole year since Gita seminar. So the theme is Gita. And Sri Krishna is going to talk about that. 6th chapter talks about mind control, meditation. Towards the end of this chapter, he talks about sense control. And throughout the book, these things are given. So, Raja Yoga, Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, there are many strategies out there. But here, it is just pure philosophy. It's giving you the foundation. Many people skip over this and go to those other things are very interesting. Sattvic person, Rajasic person, Tamasic person, what is the nature of the divine quality and the demonic quality, Daiva, Asura, Sampad, it's very interesting because especially you can analyze others and say, that's the demonic quality. But the monk under whom I studied, he said these are all meant for applying to yourself, not to others. But those are very interesting. People skip over this portion because it's very deep and philosophical, but this is fundamental. This is the point. Why is the Gita there? Because of this. To find out who am I. And the sense control, mind control, those are necessary. Without that, these will just remain as interesting theories. So they will be taught later on.
My question is a little childish, I think. It's almost like when you're a child and you...
Tell us your name, sorry.
It's Elizabeth.
Yes.
And your first time, you performed on stage and your parent told you, don't be so conscious. Don't be conscious. Don't be aware of yourself. Then you'll perform well, so that kind of thing. And I'm thinking, I find even with awareness of your own divinity, you have to be kind of less conscious. Does that make any sense?
Less conscious of?
Of maybe the external world or...
Yes. You become less conscious of two things. Our attention is entirely drawn to the surface of things. The way it looks and feels. The way other people behave with me. Our whole mind is concerned with that. And Vedanta asks you to look deeper. The moment you look deeper, you sort of lose sight of the surface. That's why again and again they will say Samadrishti, an equal vision to all. How can you have an equal vision to the pleasant and unpleasant? How can you have an equal vision to the good and the bad, the rude and the polite? How can you? Because you're looking deeper. The story about the child goes in a fair in India, they make little toys of sugar. A horse, an elephant, a tiger and a man. And the child goes and buys all of that and he wants a horse for the man to ride on. and he's crying and nagging his mom, I want a horse, but there's no horse is available. His mom says, take another one, it's all the same. Now from a child's perspective, how can it be the same? How can a horse and a lion and a tiger be the same thing? But the mom is looking deeper and says it's all the same. You play with it and then you eat it anyway. It's all sugar. Now to some extent, the mom is not so engaged with the surface of things. There's a nice story about the man who fell on hard times and went to sell form. He was a businessman. He had an image of Ganesha. He went, a golden image. He went to the shopkeeper and he said, can you give me some money? Take this. So the shopkeeper, the jeweler weighed it and he gave him some money. And Ganesha comes with the mouse, the vahana, so he said, how much for the mouse? Chuheka kitna? How much for the mouse? And the jeweler said, the same rate. And the man was outraged. You're giving me the same rate for Ganesha and for a mouse? Man, that's sacrilegious. Ganesha is God and the mouse is a mouse. And the jeweler said, for you it may be Ganesha and a mouse, for me it's gold. It goes. So the shopkeeper in your language is looking at the surface of things. He's not looking at an image, a holy image of Ganesha and a not so holy image of the mouse, but it's looking at the reality underneath. Whose vision is more correct? The shopkeeper's vision is more correct. The mother's vision is more correct. The enlightened person's vision is more correct. The enlightened person can snap back and look at the surface also and can deal with the skin. What we are saying, the enlightened person, and what the child says, the mother understands. What the angry businessman says, the jeweler understands. But they're looking at a deeper reality. Yes, can we bring it here? You had a question? Then we'll go there and we'll come back. So we'll take 2 more questions.
My name is Skanda. Maharaj, in the past you've talked about different types of Viveka, and one thing you said was that for Sat, Chit and Ananda there's, I think it's Karta Karana Viveka, and then there's Vigdrishya Viveka, and then there's Bhokta Bhogi Viveka. I might have gotten the words wrong, but can you explain those and what those
That's
mean?
a full lecture in itself. Let me see if I can. One is Karya Karana Viveka, one is Drigdrishya Viveka, and another is Bhokta Bhogya Viveka. That's one way of putting it. I heard it from a non-Buddhist teacher. Viveka means to analyze and to separate two things. Which two things? Two things which are mixed up. Sri Ramakrishna used to say that sand and sugar are mixed, the ant can separate them. Water and milk are mixed. The swan, apparently there's an old myth that the swan separates water and the milk and drinks the milk only and leaves the water. And then the third one he said, Golmale mala che, golti batniya maltilo, which is almost untranslatable into English. I'll try. Golmal means chaos. And if you split the two words, Gol and Mal, Gol literally means a circle, it means chaos in itself. And Mal means the essence. So there is something valuable in the midst of all this nonsense. You have to make sense of nonsense. You have to take the reality from the middle of the chaos. I don't know how else to translate Golmal and Mal. So that is called Viveka. It is presented to you together. Here is God and world presented to you together. Here is table and wood presented to you together. Water and wave presented to you together. In your understanding, you can't physically separate them. In your understanding, can you see the difference? And seeing this difference makes all the difference between enlightenment and ignorance. Remember, this is a path of knowledge, not actually physically doing something to it. Now, one way, it says ultimate reality is being, consciousness, bliss. Existence, awareness, bliss. Sat, Chit, Ananda. One way to understand that the ultimate reality is Sat, pure being, is this first Viveka, first approach, Karya Karana Viveka. Karya Karana Viveka means what is an effect and what is the cause. What we did, this one. Now Sato Vidyate Bhava, what has borrowed existence and what has real existence. So here, in this example, the wood and the table. The table is an effect and the wood is the material cause. Material cause means the thing out of which something is made. That which is made is called an effect, product. And the material out of which the product is made is called its cause. Now when you do that, you will end up, table is the effect. What is the cause? Material cause. Don't say carpenter. Carpenter has not become the cause in the sense of the material, the substance underneath, wood. But wood is an effect. What is the cause? Maybe the earth element. The earth element is an effect. What is the cause? In this way you will go back to being itself, isness. In modern scientific way, if you progress, this is made of certain organic materials. Those organic materials are also made of atoms. Those atoms are also made of subatomic particles. Those subatomic particles are made of quarks. And probably those quarks are made of superstrings or something. And then, nobody knows till now. But definitely, if you ask a physicist, do those quarks and superstrings, do they exist or not exist? They exist. If they exist, existence itself, Shankaracharya takes as the underlying reality. So this process of karya karana viveka, effect and cause, material cause, will lead you back to Sat, pure being. It's not so difficult to understand. One thing which is common to all the things which we see in the world, all the things which we see in the world, notice in a very simple childlike way, you know one thing is common. What is it? They all exist. One thing runs through all of them, like water through all the waves. One thing is common to all the waves, water. One thing is common to all wooden furniture, wood. One thing is common to all pots, clay. One thing is common to all the universe, existence. So the background of everything, existence is revealed as the ultimate cause of everything. Cause and effect analysis. Another analysis is if you look at your experience right now, to discover chit, consciousness. If you look at your experience right now and apply this method, Drig Drishya, whatever is an object is not consciousness. Consciousness is the subject and everything else is the object. If you experience it, it's an object. Drig Drishya is an object. Whatever you experience is an object. The world is full of objects, which is revealed to you in your experience. The body itself is an object. Is it not? I can see it, I can touch it, I can hear it. I can hear it, yes. Something here, sound is coming. If it's hot and you're sweating, you can even smell it. So all the senses operate on the body. The body is an object and you are the subject. Mind, thoughts, feelings, emotions, memories, my personality, my story, the person I am, that's also an object. Why? You're aware of it. That's not consciousness, it's an object to consciousness. That which can never be objectified and yet is the eternal subject for all objects, that is pure consciousness, that is what you are. That is Chit, this Drig Drishya Viveka. The other one is Bhogya Bhokta Viveka. Bhogya means that which is enjoyed or suffered. And Bhokta is the one who enjoys and suffers. If you do that, you will see that at the background of all enjoyment and suffering, especially all joy, suffering is like a deprivation of joy. So that the background of all joy is a non-objective fulfillment, which is now reflected as your objective pleasure. I will not go into the depth of that. That is Ananda. Karya Karana Viveka reveals Sat. Drig Drishya Viveka reveals Chit. And Bhogya Bhokta Viveka reveals Ananda. And all three are not different. We are Satchidananda and that is you yourself. You had raised your hand. Can you tell us your name and pass the mic? And one more person was there. Ashidi? Yes, we'll come back to you.
Hello, I am Amrita. My question is, do non-living beings also have conscious experiences like we humans have conscious experiences?
Do non-living beings have conscious experiences? What do you think? No, they don't. No, they don't. Nobody will say that. We sometimes say that because we think everything, we have been taught everything is consciousness. So the non-living things also have consciousness, so they must also be experiencing it. No. What is the difference between living and non-living in Vedanta? No. If Satchidananda is ultimate reality, whether it's living or non-living, Satchidananda must be there. And Satchidananda means existence, consciousness, bliss. Do non-living, yes. Do non-living things, do they exist or not?
They do.
They do. So they have borrowed existence. Now the thing is, non-living things, what is it they lack? In a simple way, living, non-living, the answer is there in the words itself. Living, non-living, what is the difference? Life. In a very simple way, I'm putting it in a very broad and simple way. Non-living things lack life. Entities which we call non-living, they lack life. What is life and what is not life? We remember as children we studied in school the characteristics of living beings, characteristics of non-living beings, I think grade 5 or 6. Maybe children study it earlier nowadays and you would get 2 marks or something for writing the correct answers or something. They eat, these do not eat, they reproduce, those do not reproduce, and so on and so forth. Vedanta says, living, in Sanskrit the word is prana. If the pranamaya kosha is present, then you call it a living being. And the pranamaya kosha doesn't come by itself, it comes with what is called a subtle body. Pranamaya kosha, manomaya kosha, vijnanamaya kosha. Sukshma sharira. If the subtle body is there, prana is there, mind and intellect. Intellect may not be developed, but some kind of subjectivity will be there in a living being. Every living being, if not intellectually, at least instinctively is aware of itself as a subject. This is an object. Even a bacteria, it wants to ingest something. It will we studied amoeba, pseudopod. It will put it out and absorb it in. Why? There is some kind of that, I am the subject, this is an object. No, it can't do Vedantic reasoning, but instinctively. So, subtle body when it is present, something interesting happens. It not only exists, it can not only borrow existence from Brahman, it can also borrow consciousness from Brahman, awareness. Depending upon the quality of the subtle body, there may be more like us human beings, very developed subtle body, intellect is there and all of that. Or a primitive subtle body like you might have in the lower animals or even plants. If there is life, there will be a subtle body because that's part of one package, Sukshma Sharira. So that's the difference between living and non-living. In Vedantic terms, subtle body is present or not. Everything that exists has a Sthula Sharira, a gross body, physical, because it exists, you can see. But in that, is there a subtle body or not? If the subtle body is there, Vedanta will say that is a living being. The word is Jiva. And if that is there, not only that the subtle body exists, it borrows not only existence from Brahman. This physical body, it borrows only existence from Brahman. This physical thing, it borrows only existence from Brahman. How do you know? See, it exists. But this thing, which is holding the book, this physical body, also has a subtle body inside it, which borrows not only existence, your subtle body exists, but also plus it can borrow, it can reflect consciousness. And therefore you have an inner subjective feeling, thinking, understanding, feeling. So only those beings which have a subtle body, they can know, they can experience. Those beings those things which do not have a subtle body, they cannot experience. Like the book, like the chair, table. Now consider smart machines. Can they experience? No. Though they give the appearance of experiencing. You go near the door, somebody will open it for you. In the airport there is a sensor. When you go near it, it opens. The sensor opens the door for you. Now I saw you and I opened the door for you. I had an experience of you and I opened the door for you. Did the sensor have an inner experience? Mr. So-and-so is coming, let me be polite and open the door. No. The whole activity of the sensor can be described physically. The engineer can tell you precisely what is happening in the sensor. There is nothing else besides that. But in our case, two things are there. The doctor can describe physiologically what is happening, but I also have an internal feeling which cannot be displayed outside. No machine can grasp it. That's again, we are back at the heart problem of consciousness. Why do I have that and why does the sensor not have it? The sensor has only a physical body. I have a subtle body also. So I have experience. Sensor doesn't have experience. Even a very sophisticated, I think Pittsburgh had a driverless cars. Did you see? I have never seen one. It must be, I don't know, it must be eerie, I think spooky to see a car nicely driving along without a driver. So such a sophisticated thing, which can mimic a human driver, maybe better than the human driver, and yet it has no experience inside. The way you are driving a car, you have an experience inside. It doesn't have. And nobody will claim that it does. Even the most ambitious Google engineer will not claim my driverless car has feelings, emotions. No. It can mimic.
All I am looking for to know, how can I change my reaction to the second arrow? This kind of feeling and everything, yes, I can see it, all right, but I'm trying to point out how can I change my reaction to the second arrow. That's I'm craving for.
Right, so are we. That's why we are here. How can I do that? The whole book is for that. The Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna is for that. Every religion is for that. How to change my reaction to the second arrow? How can I take away the trouble of the suffering of the second arrow? Depending on your approach. See, I'll give you 4 approaches. One approach is this one. See, one approach is the approach of bhakti. All my suffering I place at the feet of my beloved Lord. My Krishna, my Rama, my Ramakrishna. I surrender. I know nothing of this. I have been thrust into this life. I have lived it to the best of my ability. Perhaps I have done good. Perhaps I have done badly. Overall, I place it all at your feet because you put me here. And I want only devotion to you. That's it. You see, suffering will be less. You put the burden on somebody else, on God, where it actually belongs. You are unnecessarily grabbing it and saying it's my problem. It's the Lord's problem. The Lord will take care of it. Bhakti. Another way is yoga. By meditation. Remember, the suffering, whatever suffering I have, ultimately it has to come to my mind. Without the mind, no suffering. True or not? It's a new approach. Yogic approach is mental approach. All suffering has first to come to the mind, then only I will feel it as suffering. If I fall asleep, what suffering is there? Even if my body is, I have got severe problems, maybe surgery, maybe cancer, maybe I am dying. But when I fall asleep, what suffering? Nothing. Why? Has the cancer been cured? No. Mind is not functioning anymore. So when the mind is controlled, you keep your mind, and there are different ways of controlling the mind. A Buddhist has a particular way of controlling the mind. A bhakta, devotee has a particular way of controlling the mind. A tantric is another way. A Patanjali yogi is another way of controlling the mind. But suffering is always in the mind, and if you can control the mind and focus it on God or focus it on Atman, focus it on the breath, suffering will not arise in the mind. If it does not arise in the mind, it can't affect you. Let whatever be there in the world or in the body also. Correct or not? That is the meditative approach. Third approach, powerful approach, the Karma Yoga approach. Simple approach, we ignore it often. What is the Karma Yoga approach? I am not concerned about my little sufferings. I want to serve. One sadhu said that he was working in the Benares hospital. Morning till night, the staff is not there. And he can actually see people physically suffering, and I can help, I can be of service. How can I now think about going back and having food and typical Indian siesta, afternoon rest, when people are suffering? I have to clean the urine pot. I have to go and dress the bandage. I have to go and get the medicine from the store. Somebody is in pain. Many people are in pain. How can I sleep? Now, is it not suffering? I'm not getting food on time, I'm being sleep deprived. Yes, but I'm not bothered about that. I cannot enjoy when other people are suffering. Often we see in a house, grandmother or some, especially grandmother figure, may have many physical problems, may have many old age and all of that, but so busy the whole joint family depends on her. So morning till night up and doing, we have seen that. Why not suffering? Because my sufferings become very little compared to what I had to do for her. If you have a lot of responsibility in your office, in your family, you will find your sufferings are not so important. If you have the curse of being at leisure, you are free. No, I'm setting you free. I don't want anything from you. You live as you like. Then every one of your sufferings becomes a big giant. This has to be dealt with, this problem, that problem. That is Karma Yoga. And then there is one more approach. Final one. Supreme approach. This one. Advaita Vedanta. If you are Satchidananda from the point of view of pure being, pure consciousness, I am the Atman, what suffering? What Hari Maharaj said to Sri Ramakrishna, I see that you are in great bliss. How is Sri Ramakrishna in great bliss? Because he knows that I am the Atman which does not suffer. From that point of view, no suffering. With identification with body and mind, certainly suffering. But without the body and mind, without identification with the body and mind, then the suffering is not mine. Suffering, you put it where it belongs. Body has its suffering. Sri Ramakrishna often would say, Shorir Bujub, let the body and its pain, let the body be concerned with its pain. O mind, you remain in delight. Mon tu yanandeta. How can the mind remain in delight? Because the mind remains with God, or that I am the Atman, that knowledge shines in the mind. Therefore no pain. Alright. Now, 17th verse. Avinashi tu tad vidhi yena sarvam idam tatam vinasham abhyayasyasya na kaschit kartum arhati. Here Sri Krishna, he repeats the first one, what he said in the 16th verse, the implications of that. Avinashi is indestructible. Why is it indestructible? What is destructible? Only those things which have a beginning and an end. You are right, borrowed existence. Which things have beginning and end? Those who have borrowed existence. But you, the Atman, the self, you don't have borrowed existence. You are existence itself. Sat. So you are Avinashi. You cannot be destroyed. After all, what is destruction? Losing existence. So you cannot have destruction because you are existence itself. Body can have destruction, but you cannot be destroyed. Avinashi tu tad vidhi, know it to be indestructible. And vinasham abhyayasyasya na kaschit kartum arhati. Of this unchangeable reality, nobody can destroy this unchangeable reality. Even God cannot destroy you. You the Atman. Now he introduces a new feature of the Atman. Yena sarvam idam tatam. You the Atman, you are not only there in that body. That Atman is not limited by the limitations of the body. That sarvam idam tatam means whatever you perceive, idam means whatever is your experience of life, all that is pervaded by Brahman. Everywhere that Brahman is, that Atman is everywhere. We think, yes, I understand Atman, that means it's here somewhere, because we have a feeling, location in the body. But no, this Atman is not limited by the body. It is here, there, everywhere. Here, there, everywhere. But then why do we feel it here only? Because subtle body, physical body, subtle body, and it reflects consciousness here, and so the consciousness is manifest here. There is light everywhere, but why do I feel it here only? Why do I see it here only? Because there is something to reflect the light. Here is something to borrow consciousness, and hence we feel the presence of consciousness here. There, you feel existence there. Here, there, everywhere existence is felt. That existence you are. So you are everywhere, not just here, you are there also. Don't swallow it like that. Protest, I remember in Uttarakhand somebody said, wait. You are everywhere, Sarvavyapi, but I said, wait, I don't understand. I am here. I am not even there. How can you say I am everywhere? Now, Swami, you are there. I am here. How can you say that you are everywhere? You sit in one chair, you are not even in this whole hall. You are, no matter how big a fat a person is, cannot cover the whole hall. At the most 2 chairs maybe. Not more than that. So you are only there, not everywhere. How can you say that Atman is everywhere? So 2 answers are there. One is a simple answer. You will say, oh yes, but you are talking about the body. Body is here and body is not there. But you are in identification with the body, you are saying I am here, I am not there. That example you can give. Atman is manifest. Because the body is here, subtle body is also here, the consciousness becomes most manifest here. This answer is clear? Because of the presence of the body, you feel your presence here. Because the body is not present here, that's why you don't feel your presence here. But there is a deeper answer. This is not the answer that the teacher gave. In Hindi, the person had asked, मैं यहाँ हूँ वहाँ नहीं हूँ तो सब जगह कैसे हो सकता हूँ? I am here and not there. How can I be everywhere? You are saying you are everywhere. How? The answer is a deeper answer. And what the answer the teacher gave was, यहाँ और वहाँ दोनों ही क्या तुम में नहीं है? When you are saying here and there, are they not both in my own experience? Even there, in whose experience is it there? In your experience. Standing as a body, I say here and there, but you stand as awareness, as consciousness. Here and there are both in consciousness. Here and there are not both in the body. Only here is in the body. There is not in this body. But in consciousness, here, near, far, near and far are both in consciousness. To make it even more clear, imagine you are standing and looking on a vast field, and at the other distance you can see mountains, field, mountains, so much space. You are watching. Suddenly you wake up and sit up on your bed. Now, near and far, far distance mountain, whole of it was in your mind or not? It was in your mind. So all of that is, the whole dream is pervaded by your mind. All of this experience, whatever you experience, idam as this, is pervaded by you, the consciousness. Simple answer is, existence pervades everything, because it exists. Deeper answer is, consciousness pervades everything. Yes.
So is Vedanta in some ways asking for us to be in that kind of existential level?
Yes, yes. Vedanta is asking you to shift the reference of your eye from the body to consciousness. Why do I feel I am here? See, I am always subtly identified with the body. Then being the body, I will say consciousness is in me. But being consciousness, then you will see body is in you. What do you mean by being consciousness? I am awareness. And whatever I am aware is within me. Am I aware of the body? The body is within me. It's not very difficult. As a one step, as a help, if you need a crutch, then use the dream example. By the dream example, you realize people and animals and bodies and the sky and earth are all in the dreamer's mind. Now take one more step to back to this world. All that you see is in your awareness. If you stand as awareness, all is in you. Yena sarvam idam tatam. That consciousness, that pure being is pervaded. Everything in this universe is pervaded by it. Tatam means pervaded by it. But now pervaded how? By pervasion. Pervasion means spread out. It's in everything. But how? Is it pervasion like there is a room and incense is lit and the fragrance pervades the room? The room is separate and the fragrance is separate and it pervades the room. Are you consciousness like that? There is a world and you as consciousness pervade the world. Is it like that? Is it like light? I often give light example for consciousness. That's also not correct. Is it like light? The room was in darkness. You switched on the light and light immediately pervaded the room. Is it like that? Nature, physical universe is there Consciousness comes and pervades the universe. Is it like that? If you say it's like that, that's Sankhya. Sankhya. Purusha and Prakriti. Nature exists independently, consciousness exists independently, and one pervades the other. Advaita does not say that. Advaita says pervading everything means like wood pervades the table, like water pervades the wave. Is there something called a wave which water comes and fills up? No, the wave is nothing but water. It is water through and through. Like gold pervades the ornament or clay pervades the pot. At the beginning, you say there is a pot. You say yes, there is a pot. Second, you introduce there is something called clay which pervades the pot. Okay. Suppose I don't know what clay is. Then I'm introduced to it. There is something called clay which pervades the pot. Okay. Next, find out that clay. Where is it? Look deep inside the pot. Put your head inside. I find, yes, there is clay. But then look at the surface of the pot. Clay. Look at the bottom of the pot. Clay. Look at the whole pot through and through. It's clay only. And you realize it's not that the pot is pervaded by clay. It is clay only with a name and a form and a use. Nama Rupa Vyavahara, which you call a pot. Similarly, this entire universe, when we say Yena Sarvamidam Tatam, by which all this is pervaded, actually what it means is all this is nothing but that consciousness. With a name and a form and a use. Nama Rupa Vyavahara. That name, form and use are given by Maya, and the reality is given by that existence, consciousness, bliss. That is what is meant by pervasion. Not two things coming into contact. One thing appearing as many things. That is pervasion. In that one thing you are. Then where is suffering? But only, again, second arrow. First arrow. Vinasham abhyasyasya nakaschit kartum arhati. Nobody can destroy this. So we have learned one more thing about the Atman. What is that? What are the things we have learned about the Atman? First, it is eternal. We learned yesterday, it is not born with the birth of the body, it does not die with the death of the body. One. Second, not only eternal, it is changeless. It does not age with the aging of the body, does not decay with the decay of the body. So eternal and changeless, they are not the same thing. Eternal thing can be eternal without being changing eternal. Maya is eternal but always changing. So it is Nitya and Nirvikara. Another thing we learned, it is real. Atman, the self, is real. That which is not the self, is a huge point, is unreal. The self alone appears as the not self. You alone appear as your object. When did we learn that? Where did you say that? 16th verse. Most important verse. Atma Satyam Jagat Mithya. Brahman is real, the world is an appearance. Or you are real, the world is an appearance. There is no second thing called the world apart from you. Though you may see millions of entities, all the people and the things and the events that you experience in the dream are not second, not apart from you. In your dream, you are non-dual, because everything else that seems to be apart from you is nothing but you. Are you following me? They are all your own mind which is appearing as a dream. Here in this waking world also, you, the existence consciousness, you are appearing as all this. That is Atma Satyam Jagat Mithya. That also we learned. Then what did we learn in the 17th verse? Sarvam idam tatam. That Atman pervades everything. Everything that you experience is you alone. You pervade everything. As how? As the reality of everything. Sat. As the consciousness which appears as its object. Sat and Chit. You pervade everything. Now one more topic will be introduced. Another feature of the Atman. 18th verse. Antavanta ime deha nityasya sharirina anashino prameyasya tasmat yudhyasva bharata. And one more thing about the 17th verse. Tad vidhi, know it. Again, look, the emphasis on knowledge. You are that indestructible, unchanging, unborn, undying, pure consciousness existence. Now what do I have to do? Do I have to pray to that? Do I have to write a thesis about that? Do I have to examine it with microscope? No. Tad vidhi, know it. Know it as what? I am that. Aham Brahmasmi. The emphasis is, enlightenment is knowledge. That emphasis is there. Then number 18, Ime deha, these bodies, they have an end. Antavant, they have an end. All bodies, everything will die. These bodies will die. But that which dwells in the body, that will not die. Nityasya ukta sharirena. That which dwells in the body will not die. Now we know the technical meaning of dwells. Otherwise, dwells in the body, will think it's something like heart or liver or kidney. Maybe a little more subtle than that. Maybe a thought. Is that the Atman? No. Dwells in the body is like saying that which dwells in the table as its very existence. What is that? The wood. That which dwells in the wave as its very existence. What is that? The water. In the movie which you see on the screen, that which dwells as the very existence of the movie. What is that? The screen itself. That which dwells in this body is eternal. Dwells means not a tiny little thing. In the pictures we draw, man standing there, and in the heart there will be a little Krishna sitting like this with the peacock feather. That's an iconography. But what it means is the very existence consciousness dwells in the body. That is what you are. And that is indestructible. Anashino, that is indestructible. Body dies. Body dies means name and form changes. Now a new picture is introduced. Aprameya. Aprameya means it is not an object of knowledge. See, the moment you say it pervades everything, immediately one can ask, why can't I see it? If you say, God is transcendent, God is in his heaven and all is right with the world. Poet says that. God is in his heaven and all is right with the world. Very nice. And if you ask, why can't I see God? Because God is in heaven. You have to go to heaven. How do I go? You wait till you die. And after I die, if I go and I don't see God, you can't catch me then. Too late. That's a simple way of putting it. A philosophical way of putting it would be God is transcendent. So all the dualistic religions, God is beyond this world. That's why you can't see God. But here it's saying that Swami Vivekananda said, we Hindus worship a transcendent, immanent God, that which is beyond this entire universe, untouched by this universe, and yet in and through this universe. But if it's in and through this universe, present everywhere, why can't we see it? It says, yes.
This is not an object.
Exactly. You and Krishna are of one mind. He says, Aprameya.
I've been saying it all this time.
Alright? Here Krishna says for the first time, Aprameya, not an object of knowledge. Aprameya. It is not an object of knowledge. Prameya. So little bit let me explain. Why can't I see it? Because it's not an object of knowledge. What is Prameya? Prameya means that is knowable. So in a little bit of epistemology is required. So in this heat and afternoon people are hungry, we start epistemology now. That's why people are afraid of Vedanta. What is epistemology? Philosophy basically has three branches. One is called ontology. It used to be called metaphysics earlier. New name is ontology. Ontology means what is real. World, God, these things which study, they are real. Another part is epistemology. How do you know? Very important. Otherwise I can make any claim. How do you know? How do you know that that such and such person is there? I saw that person. How do you know that the sky is actually not blue? I read it in the physics book. How do you know heaven exists? I read it in my scripture. So in various ways we know, and these ways of knowing are called pramana. Pramana, the sources of knowledge. And what you know by the pramana is called prameya, the knowables. So the eye is a pramana. And what is knowable by the eye? Form, color, shape. The ear is a pramana. What is knowable by the ear? Sound. Tongue, nose, skin. So the 5 sense organs are pramana, and what they know are called vishaya. The prameya, the knowables, sight, sound, smell, taste, touch. So this kind of knowing is called pratyaksha pramana, direct perception. Direct perception means seeing something, hearing something. But there are other pramanas also. Anumana pramana. Anumana means inference. All our scientific knowledge and lot of our common sense is based on inference. So you get data. You get data collected by your eyes or ears and enhanced by so many sophisticated instruments, huge telescopes, powerful microscopes. All of them give you data. Based on the data you make certain, you have got a hypothesis, you test it, you make certain inference. And that's how knowledge advances. You check again with the data. That's how knowledge advances. What kind of knowledge is that? We have not directly seen it, but you have inferred it. Scientific knowledge. Common sense knowledge. I have inferred from my past experience, after the talk there will be delicious food. I can't see it yet, but I know by inference. I've seen other times it has happened, so it should happen like that. Now, inferential knowledge, it's called anumana pramana. There's another kind of knowledge which is called shruti pramana or agama pramana, where people use, those who are believing people, religion. I know God exists. I know heaven exists. How? Because my Bible, Quran, Gita tells me. How do you know it's true? Because I believe it. That's also, you can call a kind of knowledge. So these are sources of knowledge. Now, he's saying something very interesting. The Atman, Brahman we're speaking about is not an object for these things. They cannot reveal it. Why? Why not? The senses cannot reveal Brahman. Arupam, Ashabdam, Asparsham, Arasam, Arandam. It does not have form, so eyes cannot see it. If you say, suppose you ask, you are speaking, but I cannot see your speech, what will your answer be? Speech is something that you cannot see, it does not have form or color, so you cannot see. Although there are people who have got something called synesthesia, I think they can actually, they have got the senses mixed up. They can hear your form and they can see your speech like that also. There are actually such people out there. Anyway, the general thing is, speech is not an object to be seen. It can be heard. So, the Atman is something that cannot be seen. The self. You can't see it with these eyes. Can I hear it? No. It's not a sound. You can't hear it. It's not a taste. Though in church and temple a lot of food is there, but Atman cannot be tasted. Pure consciousness or pure being cannot be tasted. So none of the 5 senses can reveal it. It's beyond the senses. Alright? Can I infer it? No. You cannot infer it from any data. No data will reveal it to you. Inference will not work. Alakshanam. Can I... so the only thing that's remaining to me is scripture. So can the Upanishad, Gita, they can reveal it, right? No, not even that. It is beyond language. Even words cannot reveal it, and these are words. And what are they doing? There are some strategies they are using. For example, notice when the way we have been approaching it is what the Upanishad and the Gita they do, because words cannot reveal it. What can words do? If the words cannot speak of Atman or Brahman, can at least tell you what it is not. I cannot, yes, neti, that's one strategy. I cannot reveal to you the pure consciousness, but I can say that pure consciousness is not the body, not the prana, not the mind, not the intellect, not the deep sleep experience, pancha kosha, 5 koshas, not that, not that, not that. Hopefully at the end you will grasp it. So directly Atman cannot tell, the book cannot tell you. The book can only lead you in a certain direction and hope that you intuitively grasp it. All the practices, they cannot reveal God to you. Even in bhakti, by your bhakti you cannot catch God. By your bhakti you please the Lord and the Lord reveals Himself to you. Upanishad, by your meditation can you reveal? No. God reveals Himself or the Atman reveals it. Your mind cannot catch it. Upanishad says, Kena Upanishad, Yan manasana manute yena hor manomatam tadeva brahmatvam vidhi nedam yadidam upasate. What the mind cannot think of, but by which the mind thinks. What is that? Consciousness. Know that to be Brahman, not what you worship as this thing. So that's why when you worship image, picture, we are not saying that this thing is God, and that this frame and this color and this ink or this marble, that is God. No. We are saying that there is a reality which this stands for. It points towards it. And actually the reality is your own inner reality. Tadeva brahmatvam vidhi. Know that to be Brahman alone. So aprameya. None of the sources of knowledge, no pramana can reveal it. So it's unknowable. Is it unknowable? You should have told me. I've been sitting here since yesterday. I came yesterday morning, now afternoon session. If you had told me at the beginning you cannot know it, I would not have come. Swami Vivekananda giving a Jnana Yoga lecture in London, he says, you must not go away with the idea that it's unknowable. It is more than knowable. Knowledge is a degeneration. Consciousness using the mind and the eyes has a knowledge. I am seeing. Consciousness using the mind and the ears has a knowledge. I am hearing. Consciousness using the intellect reads books and says has a knowledge. I understand. All of this knowledge depends on consciousness. Depending on the instrument, you have understanding, hearing, smelling, remembering, desiring. These are all different kinds of conscious experience. That's what we call knowledge. Consciousness itself is not an object. How is it known? It is more than known in two ways. One is it's known through its activities. Electricity. If you ask, what is the one thing which got into the light and made it shine? Which got into the fan and made it give air? Which got into the microphone and made it amplify sound? Remember, air, sound, light, these are not the qualities of electricity. But depending on the instrument, the same electricity will give you so many functions. Without electricity, none of them are any good. Similarly, consciousness associated with so many instruments, which have ultimately been produced from consciousness itself through Maya, it gives so many activities, so many kinds of knowledge. But in itself, it is not an object to any of them. But by the activities of these things, we understand the presence of electricity. Alright? By the how do we know that consciousness? How can we know? Because you are seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, remembering, thinking, desiring, believing, not believing. Shankaracharya says, Yaiva tasya asya nirakarta tasyeva atmasa. The one who denies that such a thing is possible is Atma. It is the Atma of that very person. Because of that consciousness, he is able to deny such things are not possible. I am a materialist. Why? Because that pure consciousness is working through him. Without that, there is no question of affirming, denying, knowing anything, believing, disbelieving. Nothing is possible. In fact, the very existence of the universe is not possible without that pure being. Remember borrowed existence? So by the very nature of things, by the activity of things, our own conscious experiences, we can intuit the presence of the background consciousness. That's one way of knowing. Another is, there is no words to explain it. Sri Ramakrishna says, Bodhe Bodhkara, in Bengali he said, awareness of awareness. Awareness of awareness. That awareness does not require another thing to reveal it. It is self-revealing. In Sanskrit there is a word Swaprakasha. Swaprakasha. How will you know the chair? Light up, give a light, you will know the chair and the people, everything in this room will be revealed when you switch on the light. So, how do you know an object? How can you see an object? By adding light to it. How will you see the light? By adding more light to it. How do you see the chair? Shine a light on it. How do you see the glass? Shine a light on it. How do you see that person? Shine a light on him. How do you see the light? Will you say shine another light on it? No, it reveals itself. It reveals itself and reveals everything else. Another example, sugar. And the water is not sweet in itself. Now suddenly it tastes sweet. Something has gotten into it which I can't see, but making it taste sweet. What did you add to water to make it sweet? Sugar. And the milk is not sweet in itself. Now suddenly it tastes sweet. So something got into it, makes it sweet. What is that? Sugar. So every item doesn't taste sweet in itself, but if you add sugar to it, it becomes sweet. So that's the rule. How to make anything sweet? Add sugar to it. Then how to make sugar sweet? Add sugar to it? No. Sugar is the exception. It is sweet in itself. It's not a borrowed sweetness. Similarly, consciousness is self-revealed. It reveals everything. To know anything, you need consciousness. But to know consciousness, you need not make it an object of consciousness. To know anything, you have to make it an object of consciousness. But to know consciousness itself, you need not make it an object. It shines forth. But it's not revealed as an object. So the only way to put it is, Sri Ramakrishna says, Bodhe Bodhkara. That means Bodha of Bodha. Bodha means awareness. Awareness of awareness. Whatever that means. This is the meaning of aprameya, not an object of knowledge. That need not disappoint you, not an object of knowledge. Too bad. I'm not coming back for the last session. No. It is. If it was an object of knowledge, that would be a tragedy, because it would become an object. To whom would it be an object? It is the revealer of all objects. Of course, in itself, all objects are nothing but it. That's the beauty of it. But it's very tricky. It appears as so many things and then reveals it itself. Aprameya. Alright. More or less one or two more features are left. So what are the things we have been told? That pure being, that pure awareness, pure consciousness. What features does it have? You, the self. First, you are not born and you do not die. You are eternal. Second, you do not change. Old age, disease, you don't change. Depression, you don't change. Those things do not affect you. So, nirvikara, second feature, unchanging. Third feature, it is real. Yeah, so many things are real. No. Compared to it, nothing else is real. It is the reality of all things. All things borrow reality from it. Borrow existence from it. You are the only reality. Just like you are the only reality in your dreams. Nothing else is real. They all borrow reality from you and then scare you. I'm getting late for the train and the Uber is not arriving. What will I do? Uber, train, late, all of them are nothing other than you, the dreamer. So, right. Real and false. Fourth, pervades everything. Sarvam vidam tattva. But remember, pervades everything how? Not like incense, not like light, as the reality of everything. Just like water pervades rains, gold pervades ornaments, wood pervades furniture, clay pervades pot. You, the existence, pervade every existing thing. How? As their existence. You, as consciousness, pervades every conscious experience. Fourth, that was number 4, I think. Fifth, aprameya. It's not an object of knowledge. It is that which reveals all objects of knowledge. But don't be afraid that it is also unknown. No, it is more than known. It is the only thing by which makes things known. Very good. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat Shri Ram Krishna Arpanamastu. The difficult portion is over. You are over the top. Now the rest is there's one more thing to be talked about. The rest is very beautiful poetry. Very nice. Krishna will talk about. Do we have? Is lunch there now or?
Yes, we have lunch, box lunch
Very
at
good.
the same place where you have tea today morning.